So good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are just waiting momentarily on one more speaker, and we will get started promptly after that. Oh, as I speak, here she goes. Just give it a moment. Great. Hi there, Alexis. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Apologies for the delay.
Oh, no. No worries at all. All right. Well, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining today's webinar titled Alternative Legal Careers, a discussion on non-traditional paths for Juris doctors. First and foremost, we want to say thank you to the Belonging Project for hosting this webinar series. And just to give you a bit about the Belonging Project, it is a collaborative network of professional and personal support for diverse legal talent across industry organizations and law firms. The Belonging Project offers opportunities and programs to support diverse law students and lawyers during the pandemic. This initiative will contribute to diversity in the legal profession and encourage others to contribute and leverage their expertise and resources. So once again, thank you to the Belonging Project for hosting this webinar series. Now, my name is Whitney Woodard, and I'm going to be moderating for this afternoon's discussion, and I am joined by panelists Philip Thomas Hornbuckle, Dustin Robinson, Courtney Smith, and Alexis Robertson. Our panelists will share their journeys and advise on pursuing non-traditional paths for Juris doctors. But before we dive in, I would like for each one of our panelists to go ahead and just give us a short introduction. Tell us who you are, your current role, and what company you work for.
Do you care who starts first?
Yeah, whoever wants to go first. Maybe we'll
Alexis,
go ahead and start.
Oh, sure. My name is Alexis Robertson. I'm Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Foley & Lardner. And I started my career as a practicing attorney. I practiced for about 7.5 years before leaving practice about 5 years ago. During that time, I was an associate at Kirkland & Ellis, a commercial litigator for about 6 years. I was an associate at Seyfarth Shaw, a labor and employment attorney for the remainder time. I was a legal recruiter for a couple of years, and I settled into the D&I space a bit over 3 years ago.
Great. Thanks, Alexis. Philip?
I'm Phillips Thomas Hornbuckle. I currently serve as the Director of Intercultural Student Life and Global Programming at York College of Pennsylvania. It's a small private coeducational institution in South Central PA. It is a tiny little office in a small school that does a number of services, including diversity and inclusion work. We do cultural programming. We serve as kind of a resource for bias response for students and other members of the campus community. We do professional diversity development. We oversee spiritual life, Jewish student life, international student support. We also run the food pantry for basic needs insecure students, and we are the home base for grants addressing both voter engagement and turnout and sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking from both the state and the Office on Violence Against Women and the DOJ. I think that's everything. So we do have a very diverse portfolio of services for our students, but we enjoy it a lot, and I definitely apply all of those skills in other areas of campus where I also serve as a hearing board member and sit on institutional committees.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Philip. Courtney, do you want to go next?
Yeah, my name is Courtney Smith. I'm a legal project manager here at Seyfarth Shaw in Chicago. I sit in our Lien Solutions group, which serves all of the different legal groups across the country.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. And Dustin, you want to round us out?
Absolutely. Thanks, Whitney. Hi, everyone. My name is Dustin Robinson. I am Seyfarth's Client Engagement Manager. Depending on who I'm talking to, that can be called a number of things. Given today's audience, I'll go ahead and acknowledge that I am the firm's sales function. I focus on establishing client relationships and expanding our business and making sure that we keep our clients happy. At Seyfarth, we use a lot of things like Whitney's team, or Whitney and Courtney's team both, our Lien Solutions team, and project management resources, process improvement disciplines, technology solutions is a big part of my life, data analysis, all of the things that actually make legal law firm client relationships run, the foundation beneath it. Those are the things that I speak to while still also strategically thinking through exactly how to grow the firm's business. Actually focusing on the fact that at the end of the day, the operations of a law firm are a business, and we do need to attend to that. So looking forward to talking with you all today.
Great. Thank you, Dustin. And before we get started and jump into our questions for our panelists, I just want to advise everyone that we will have a Q&A up. So if you have any questions for any of our panelists, feel free to drop it in there. And towards the end of our program, maybe in the last 10 to 15 minutes, we will address whatever questions you have, whatever questions come through. So feel free to drop them in there. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to start with something a little light, and we want all of you all to just go ahead and answer. We can use the same order we just went in. But essentially, give us a little background on why you decided to go to law school.
All right, same order. So I guess that means me. I just always wanted to be a lawyer ever since I was probably in elementary school. I joked my mother raised me to be a lawyer because she was constantly challenging me. I was someone who knew when I was taking the LSAT, probably my freshman year of college. So it's hard for me to say why. It was just something I knew I was going to do and that I did.
No, I think that's great.
It was, on the one hand, it was a family business, kind of an easy decision to kind of want to do it. But my father is an attorney, and so the idea of kind of matlocking out my career, getting to kind of work with my dad at his office was always very attractive to me. But at the same time, I always loved languages and traveling. And for me, I thought it was really cool the way lawyers translated legal work for clients, and that was something that I really wanted to do on a daily basis. So those were the two reasons I went to law school.
Thank you, Philip.
Right, and I think I'm probably the other end of the spectrum from someone like Alexis. I decided to go to law school in undergrad, and I went straight from undergrad, but I might have been that example of someone who went to law school because they knew they didn't want to go to med school, which is what the background from my family and a lot of people I knew, and I knew that wasn't the route for me, but I did want to do something professional and sort of arrived at law school as the result.
Okay.
I was just always that kid that liked to argue. I was a big speech and debate nerd in high school, which I'm sure probably resonates with a lot of you on this call. And that actually has turned out to inform a lot of what I do nowadays. I've always been, and I'm still to this day, very interested in constitutional law. You know, I was in law school taking courses in separation of powers and what's it called? The interstate commerce clause, and, super useful and really practical real world types of disciplines. But those are the things that I always found to be interesting and I still care about to this day, but that is what led me to go to law school.
And, Dustin, I think I'm a little bit like you. I think I liked to argue. So I think that was kind of why I chose the same route as you. So I kind of resonate with that as well. So sticking with you then, Dustin, when did you determine that you wanted to pursue a non-traditional legal role, and how did you come to that conclusion?
So I actually found as I got into probably around my second year of law school that desire to really argue and engage and almost problem solve, I didn't really feel that coming at me through the Uniform Commercial Code, the UCC, which is still the thing that I most wanted to burn walking out of a law school exam. Right, a lot of us I'm sure do. And I just became started to question whether there might be something outside of traditional legal practice. I wasn't getting quite as stimulated from some of the internships that I had. I mean, they were really rewarding and really fulfilling and great people to work with, but it wasn't just quite hitting the spot, so to speak. And I happened to stumble into a course, my final year at law school, called Technology, Innovation, and Legal Practice. And that really opened my eyes to a lot of the things that, quite frankly, we aren't taught in our, Corporations 101 course or anything like that actually relate to how it is that you do the business of being a lawyer. That really kind of stoked the fire within me, so to speak, to really look elsewhere, and that's how I got where I am today.
Okay. And same question for Philip. At what point did you kind of determine you wanted to pursue something that was non-traditional?
It was a bit of a slow burn to reach that point. I am an overachieving nerd. So like I loved being in law school. I loved the conversations I was having in class with my teachers and with my classmates outside of class. I loved volunteering in the elder law clinic. I volunteered for it even after I graduated because I loved the investment piece and like the engagement with people. But as I recognized how much of it was not that actual translation work in real time for my clients, I was like, something else is missing. Like where I want to be able to invest more hours of my day on that direct investment piece. And so I had to have a lot of conversations with mentors, and they ended up helping me recognize that that investment and translation piece wasn't just with the legal area. It was also in investing in my team. And like, I like people I work with to leave better than how we all came together. So that was when I was kind of told, you might want to try looking at student affairs. And so while studying for the bar, I got a job in student affairs, and like I blinked, I had passed the bar and was like, I hadn't quit my job. And so at that point, I was like, there's something here that I need to kind of take more time and really explore. And then as my responsibilities have increased, I've noticed I'm using my degree in many other ways besides just my strict kind of client engagement role.
Okay. So one of the things that sounds like that happened both for you and Dustin was, you know, going through the law school experience, kind of falling into either a course or noticing something in the practices that you had, that there were certain aspects of that that weren't necessarily legal focused that you really loved and wanted more of. Yeah, so I think that's really helpful. Did you guys ever want to practice law?
Oh, absolutely. I was going to do public international law. That was my plan. I was going to do the public international side of my dad's little small town firm, and I would also do family and estates planning, so I could see a client in the grocery store, but I could also jet to Paris for some other client case. Like that was the grand plan. But student affairs just fed a part of my spirit that I wasn't aware really needed that much attention. And so I've made that adjustment, and I don't get to jet to Paris, but students from Japan come, so that's cool. So there's some compromise there, but yeah, absolutely did.
Okay.
I will say that one of the things that, you know, I have repurposed into another way of doing things. There was part of me that always wanted to be in the courtroom. One of the greatest compliments I ever got from one of the professors was like, oh, you're like, you know, something alluded to being like Atticus Finch. And I was like, yes, absolutely. But there are other ways of bringing those skill sets and using those aspects of your background. And also, if you really love contract reading, you know, that's another skill set that I don't have, but some people do. And there are other ways of making that work, I would say.
Absolutely. And I'm actually glad you brought that up, Dustin, because later I will ask a question that kind of alludes to, you know, skill sets necessary to pursue things that are outside of the traditional legal route. So Alexis, you let us know that you're someone who actually practiced law for quite some time and then made that transition. When did you make that determination that you wanted to switch, and why?
I'm trying to think. The long answer, the short answer. I always thought I wanted to be a labor and employment lawyer. And so, like I mentioned, I was actually at Lifarth for a bit, and I got my wish after 6 years of being a general commercial attorney. And I was like, okay, because I thought a lot of times you're always chasing the next thing, and I got my next thing, and I was just like, oh, I'm not delightfully happy now. The skies haven't parted and bestowed happiness upon me, which caused me to wonder if practice really was for me. And then an opportunity to be a legal recruiter came up. I'll joke the universe conspired, and you know, one thing led to another, and I found myself saying yes to that opportunity, because when I look at the through line of who I am as a person and what interests me, it really is that direct connection with people. Like I actually almost found Cyfarth's like recruiting manager. Yeah, but I just decided to take that leap after getting what I thought I wanted practice-wise.
No, and I think that's great, especially for people who are currently practicing and, you know, kind of come to that same conclusion where, you know, maybe there's something more, or I'm not quite as satisfied as I thought I could be. So I think that's a great perspective.
Yeah, you know, and one thing I'll add though is I talk a lot about professional alignment and what you do as a day job lining up with who you are, because they're really the same thing. We often talk about work and home, but really this is all your life. And the more you're able to align your profession with your interests, your passions, your whatever, just the more you're going to enjoy work. But you can't, it's hard to outwork someone who's passionate about what they do. So I think that's what it boils down to.
And I think that's a really great point. And I think that kind of molds into what Dustin and Philip said before, where, you know, it really needed to be part of who they were, whatever it was that they were going to pursue. So I think that's a really great point, Alexis. Okay, so I think one of the big questions we would want to know is, you know, being that everyone here is doing a non-traditional legal role, how did you land that job? How did you land your current role? And this is a question for everybody. So Courtney, let's go to you.
Sure. So my current role with Cyfarth, I've been here about 2 years, and I came to this just sort of through that traditional posting. You know, there was an opening at the firm. I was working at an ALSP, an alternative legal service provider at the time. Was looking to make a change, and so I did do that. So I think probably for me, it's more about how I even got started in legal project management in the first place rather than the lateral move, because I did kind of fall into that. I had wanted to do tax law, where I probably lost most of the audience now. But when I got out of school, I really did want to work with the IRS, and they weren't hiring at the time, so I ended up doing some e-discovery work at a few places. And while I was there, I really did start to like the project management aspect. At heart, I'm a problem solver, and I like the aspect of the team building and the problem solving. And so that's how I got into legal project management, was just sort of falling into it. But then along the way, you know, learning more about it, learning more about the industry, realizing that's what I like. Then it's about getting to know more about the different spaces you can do it at a firm, at an ALSP, these different venues where you can take not just project management, but the legal project management aspect. And so then when there was a posting in Cyfarth, that's when I, you know, sent in my resume and made the leap.
Okay. Philip?
My role, I was working, I worked first in first year experience and then jumped over to residence life and was building skills there. My partner, now spouse, took a job up in the Mid-Atlantic, which was not in our plan. So I needed to find a space up here, and I wanted to stay in student affairs, but then this office with diversity and inclusion, multicultural affairs opportunity came up, and I hadn't really had an opportunity to explore that. So I applied for the job, and my phone interview with the director at the time was supposed to be 30 minutes. It was 2 hours because we got into, right. We got into talking about like passion for the work and what it looks like when you invest in students and you translate campus institutional policy to the student perspective and like what that all looks like. So I landed the job not long after that and moved up here, and then went from being his assistant director to replacing him when he left for another role. So I kind of inherited my current position, but it literally grew out of a 2-hour phone interview.
Well, but the other thing is, right, that 2-hour interview was a passionate discussion about something that just aligns with who you are, which, back to Alexis's point, you know, centering what you do, making sure that it aligns with who you are, and makes getting jobs for that thing that much easier. Alexis, what about you?
So I'm a little bit different. Yes, I've applied online for things, but the roles I've had ever since leaving law school, I've known somebody there. And of course I had to apply online and I had to go through the process. But every job, including this one, there was someone I knew there to get intel, to kind of be like, yes, we'll interview her before she's even applied. I made the transition between recruiting into D&I work off of doing a presentation at a NALP conference on recruiting and retaining millennial attorneys of color, which led to someone at Baker McKenzie reaching out to me saying, hey, we have this D&I role. Do you want to do that? And me thinking, no, I like recruiting, but let me find out more. And then, of course, I took that job. I do think overall when it comes to, and this is the recruiter side of me talking, so I have to stop because I could go on all day long. When it comes to jobs, particularly if you are coming straight out of school, your first priority is getting experience, getting an opportunity. So it will look different than hearing about how somebody who's been working for a long time got their next role. But also, I just can't stress enough to use things like LinkedIn, to use your classmates, to use connections, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk a bit about that more. But at the end of the day, a job search is ideally a people game if you can make it that.
And just kind of to piggyback off of that, Alexis, what I will add is, similar to kind of Courtney's experience with the current role that I have, LinkedIn, it was like seeing it on LinkedIn and submitting it through that way. But LinkedIn and all of the things that you mentioned were definitely useful resources. So I definitely second that. And Dustin, what about you? How did you land your current role?
I lucked into that professor of mine who taught that one course on technology, innovation, and legal practice. It was while I was at Georgetown. And this was back in 2012 when technology and the intersection with law was really becoming a thing. And so I was part of what we called the Iron Tech Lawyer Competition. I was part of the inaugural class of it. I'm still very proud of that to this day. And my professor very aggressively promoted it online and social media and all of that. And my original boss reached out to her saying, hey, do you have any students? We're looking to fill a role of an associate legal solutions architect. And that was that. And I've been at Cyfarth ever since. Granted, I am currently on my 5th title within Cyfarth, but it has all been within the firm.
Okay. So it was because of a professor that was able to kind of help you.
Yes, absolutely.
And just to kind of piggyback off of Alexis's answer and also Dustin's, from a resource standpoint, and this is for anybody who wants to answer, what would be the most helpful for someone who is looking for a non-traditional role, just to even know what's out there?
You have to figure out what you're interested in. So I've been I don't know if it's true, but I've responded to a few people in the chat and they're like, okay, where would you point a law student who doesn't want to practice? And I was like, well, what do you want to do? And so the thing is that we could say, here's these 5 things, but unfortunately and fortunately, the answer is, in many ways, the world is your oyster, right? I mean, you can really decide on anything. And so I do think taking that self-assessment, what interests me? Okay, I've realized practicing doesn't. Are there aspects of legal that interest you? I mean, because that could mean being someone like me applying for a large law firm admin sort of role, whether that be in professional development or HR or whatever. It could mean, we've heard about academia. It could mean, I have a friend who's a lawyer, but also former nurse who works for a large company that integrates hospital system software, right? I mean, like it could literally be anything, but it's all going to start with where do your interests lie? And that's not something, unfortunately, that we wouldn't be able to answer for you.
I think that's great advice. I think me personally, I think I went through a phase where I didn't exactly know what it was that interests me. So maybe I didn't have the same experience as Dustin or Phillips. But I think, it kind of the experience that Courtney had where there maybe wasn't a job available. So I just kind of fell into something else, which then at least developed the idea of, oh, I like this specific skill set about what I do. How do I do more of that? So, it might be exploring just different opportunities that are outside of legal so that there's a skill set you might have that you don't even know that really might suit you. So.
And there's value in knowing what you don't like. I think a lot of times, especially when you're like right out of law school, you're finishing up, you're told you have to go in with a plan. and you're told you have to come out with a plan. You have to know exactly what you want to do. If you don't know, if you think that you really don't want to practice law anymore, but you know that you love the transactional piece of it, okay, why do you like the transactional piece? Is there security and structure in it? Okay, so maybe that project manager role is more attractive to you because your role will be providing structure for a client or, you know, your company. So, okay, then maybe HR is also something that will fit well with you, or maybe this and that. So don't misidentify knowing what you don't like as a useless tool, because it's not. You need to absolutely be exercising and honing that self-awareness to be able to tease out, if I don't know what I like, but I know what I don't, use that to make your way over to what you do want.
Yep. I think it's all a part of the journey. And for the people who are in law school and realize they don't want to practice, there is just the reality of you're going to need a job, right? And we can't discount that. There's a lot to be said for like, it's a job, and whether you learn what you like through it or learn what you don't like, that's okay. That's your path. And to some extent, you just need to start on a path. Just go in a direction and then figure it out from there.
And if I can make a little plug for a whole world that I don't think I really appreciated when I was in law school, but now I do. I may be the firm's client engagement manager right now, but 2 titles ago, I was a solutions consultant. And the wide, wonderful world of consulting, come to find out there are a whole lot of different ways of advancing your career through that space. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Big Four style consultant, a Deloitte, a PwC type. It can just as easily be, I have a number of friends who work for healthcare consultancies. Phillips is alluding to, you know, looking into spaces like that in nonprofit sectors. Going and exploring what those companies have to offer, go on their website, ask folks to take a meeting or a coffee. That's a really good way, I think, to find opportunities that still allow you to leverage your JD. A lot of folks I know end up in the consulting space, maybe not formally practicing under the terms of the ABA, but they're still leveraging everything that they've learned from, you know, whether it's healthcare law, nonprofit law, any number of things.
Thank you, Dustin. No, and I think that's a great ad. And speaking of, you know, ways in which you can use your JD, Courtney, in your current role, do you use your JD? Do you feel like you utilize the different skill set and educational background that you gained?
Yeah, so I would say, strictly speaking, a JD isn't required for what I do, but it definitely helps. Especially working in a law firm with attorneys, it does help to know a little bit about the law, the process, you know, where we're going to be going, what happens in an arbitration versus litigation versus a real estate closing. Like, there's an awareness, and it's good to have a working knowledge there. The terminology, too, doesn't hurt. But I think one thing that really helps working with attorneys a lot of time, especially legal project managers, you fill the role of translator a lot of the time with different cross-functional departments for the attorneys, and coming with the JD and that legal education, you know what sort of training the attorneys have had and maybe what they haven't. One thing attorneys don't necessarily get a lot in school is a lot of business background, not necessarily a lot of technology background. They're very, very smart people, but they also are very, very smart people who don't like to admit when they don't know something. So it helps to read the room sometimes to know that maybe they haven't been well-versed in this particular thing. They're experts in their field. This might not be something that they're completely aware of. And it helps you to make sure that you know, the information that's getting to them from other departments, from billing, from conflicts, from wherever, you know, it's filtered to them in a way that they'll get it, and it's most accessible, and it's more productive to have conversations where everybody's on the same page. So I think that, you know, just kind of knowing their background, kind of being able to speak the lingo can help a lot. And then, you know, I think the JD does help, that background helps prioritize. when something comes in and you're working on a project and you get a unfavorable ruling on a litigation case, or, you have a better feel for what the downstream implications might be to that, how important this is. Is this a stop the presses kind of moment? We have to get everybody on the phone right away. Is this something that can wait till tomorrow? You just get a better feel for some of those things because you have a little bit more insight into the whole process.
And so overall, you would say, it sounds like, yes, the JD is very helpful as far as the legal project management space goes.
Yeah, I think that it helps a lot. I think it streamlines some conversations that you have. In some circumstances, I think working with attorneys, it helps establish rapport or build trust a little bit faster. I think it's been very helpful.
Okay. And Philip, how do you feel as far as being in the educational space? Are you using any of your JD skills?
Oh, yes, very much. I think what's been most important has been, because we work with students of every major, they're all applying to jobs. So even things like cleaning up resumes, helping them edit cover letters, even emailing professors or each other, having those conversations about communication, about tone, about context, about word choice. A lot of that expertise comes from like our legal writing training and background, the mediation piece. I use that a lot. And then sitting in on conduct hearings, as a voting member for that is important to help those students understand your student code of conduct. This is not a criminal process. If it were a criminal process, this is what it would look like. So being able to explain and delineate and clarify things is a daily part of my practice. So my JD is in high use. I joked when I first got this job that I was a lawyer in recovery, like, oh, I'm not really practicing. I won't be using this too much. But I really do in my role. So even when students poke their head in my office and they're like, I'm thinking about law school, I'm like, do you want the pro or the con? Like, which one do you want? Because we can talk through the whole thing. Like I can scare you off or I can lure you in. But that piece does come up every day, every email, every engagement with a student or a colleague.
That's great. Alexis or Dustin, did you guys have anything to add as far as feeling like your JD is utilized in your current roles?
Mine very much is. Also, I did practice for quite some time, so the ability to communicate and to really take complex ideas and make them simple is important. But also, there is I think a snobbery in the profession. I just think we could be honest about that. And I think Courtney alluded to it, and I see Dustin nodding his head. And there are a lot of lawyers, I hate to say this, but they can't hear me until they hear, oh, you're a lawyer too. Oh, where'd you go to law school? Oh, where did you practice? And for me to pretend like that doesn't exist, I can't. I have to be honest. So that helps too. Back to the relationship building aspect.
I 100% agree with that. I have gone on record as saying that the law is the most elitist profession in the world. I think probably a lot of you on this call have experienced that as well. So it does help as a method of credentialing. It's by no means a necessity for a lot of what all of us do, but it does help. A phrase that gets thrown around a lot is a JD advantaged job. If it's not being an actual lawyer, it's something where you may have a JD, but you're actually a business professional. And so in that sense, it does allow you to bridge the gap a little bit and be a person who can vouch for other business of law professionals who are, quite frankly, maybe far more credentialed than you are, and actually can better do the job, but you're going to make that bridge for them to the partner or whomever. Granted, a lot of us also are talking, or at least 3/4 of us are talking from the perspective of big law. It could be an entirely different animal when you're in smaller law, or, there are some of you who may want to be criminal lawyers and go into defense or prosecution, whole nother ball game there. But at the end of the day, it's still speaking some of the languages, knowing off the top of your head what SOX immediately refers to or what the GDPR immediately refers to. Those kinds of things, it does come in handy for what I do for sure.
Right. And I would agree. And in terms of my experience, I definitely think that having that JD has been able to open some doors that might not have been opened had that JD not been there. So I do think sometimes it gives you access to places where maybe you wouldn't have the same access if you didn't have that JD. So let's switch over for a second. We're going to switch to some of the questions that are coming through because we actually have a lot of questions coming through on our Q&A. So I want to just pose a few of them to you all so everyone who's listening can get some answers here. One of the questions that came through is, let's see, do you all have any advice in terms of negotiating your pay and compensation when you work in a role that doesn't require a JD, but significantly aids your value to employers?
I mean, it's something that you should, of course, raise and use. And I know you said when you work in a role, and also treat it from if you are negotiating for a new role. For a new role, generally there is a salary band that is set, and it can help you within that salary band. And I do think you should utilize it as it's, the equivalent of me having, I have a higher degree, but it's really tough because it depends on what industry you're in. There's going to be some places, back to what Dustin was saying about JD Advantage, that will compensate you for that, start you at a higher salary. There will be other places where it doesn't really mean much to them. And so it's hard, it depends on what the job is.
And depending on what identities you present or disclose to those potential employers, that also affects how you negotiate. If you know you're trying to navigate a more conservative environment, knowing that they may offer you something less because you have an identity that typically, systemically, is not as valued, trying to be creative of what you negotiate. If you know you're not going to hit that midpoint of the salary, but you saw on the website that they're really about employee wellness, okay, like your commute's going to be, my commute to York is 75 minutes each way. So with the pandemic, I've been able to work from home. That's 3 hours of my life that I get back. And so it's really changed how I prioritize my wellness. And as we are returning to campus, like I've had conversations with my now new supervisor about, what does returning 4 days a week look like? Like, can I have 1 day a week where I'm now working at home and I can meal prep? I can be more productive. That's 3 more hours you get of me logged in instead of me being on the road. So be creative with what you negotiate. If there's one thing you'll compromise on, whether it's salary or benefits or whatever, ask, like, can you cover my ABA dues if I only get $200 in professional development? If this is going to be my salary, can I telework 2 days a week? So don't forget to do your research as you look at ways to negotiate. Be creative. Because those HR departments are having to learn to flex more with the pandemic, with the new generations who are coming in. They want a different workforce. So this is your opportunity to kind of provide that space for them and for you to learn to use your voice.
That's great. Dustin or Courtney, did you guys have anything to add? No? Well, we have another question. Okay, so let's go to this next question because I think this is actually really good in terms of, the skill set and abilities that are competitive and look good for someone who's trying to transition into a non-traditional space. So the question is, with a shortage of JD Advantage and attorney jobs, many get comfortable in e-discovery and doc review, but many employers don't value that on a resume unless it's done as a project manager. What skills and abilities should a doc reviewer highlight to be competitive?
It's really going to depend on the role. So I hate to say that, but that just has to be the threshold. Like, it's depending on what job you are applying for. I will also say, even down to how you depict the doc review on your resume. So in working with candidates when I was a recruiter, there were people who had done doc review for a lot of different companies, and they would have the succession of short engagements on the resume. And I would get them to put the title, whatever the title was, doc review or whatever, I think there's probably a better way to say it, and condense those. Same time period, same information, but now you look less jumpy and more consistent. So there's actually a number of things you should be considering in your resume beyond just the skills. But I mean, a lot of it's going to be the decision making And it's hard though with that, because without knowing what job you're applying for, it's hard for me to highlight. So maybe some others have some ideas, and you could even add a little more detail so we could dig in a bit more.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that with a lot of reviews, or there's more and more companies in the space that are doing a lot more substantive review. So instead of just cruising through emails these days, you might be analyzing harder terms, right? This might be a merger and acquisition, and you're analyzing for change of control, or you might be helping to renegotiate and repaper contracts. So anytime that you're getting into the substantive area, or it's a review where you kind of do a deeper dive into the area of law, I think you can highlight that. Any leadership opportunities that you get, whether you're helping with QC and you're helping to develop protocols, guidance for the team, I think you can run with that to the extent you can, and highlight the opportunities that you get there, and you can put a good spin on it, because all of that is good and is useful. It is a lot of work that's by its nature. It's hard to stand out, but those opportunities, when you do, be sure that you call it out.
And I will make a plug in particular for when I used to wear more of my technology consultant hat as a legal solutions architect. There are a large or a growing number of roles, particularly in the doc review space, where folks have begun to think through how can we use artificial intelligence and other automation tools that actually require someone to teach the bots or the code or whatever to actually program those tools. We at SciPark, we have a team called SciPark Labs. A number of those folks that we work with on a regular basis do have JDs and are literally teaching robots how to parse and analyze documents. And they are able to do so because they understand, in reading through a lease, this is what a covenant means versus this is what indemnification means, and all that stuff that you were trained on in law school. And another number of other firms are opening similar roles. There are also legal tech startups out there. So in particular, if you're coming from the doc review space and you aren't afraid of technology, which I'm sorry, no one in this day and age should be, it's inexcusable at this point to run away from it. If you can embrace those tenets, there are definitely jobs out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So switching gears a bit, we got a question in here. So I heard that many employers might be unwilling to hire a JD graduate for a non-legal position because they think you might still want to practice law and leave the position soon. Did any of you have this kind of obstacle? If you did, how did you deal with it? Looks like Philip is waving her hand here.
Yes. When I moved up to this region, I left my whole network as a professional and as a budding attorney had been down south. Both of my godparents are attorneys in Birmingham. My father was an attorney all over North Alabama, but primarily in Anniston and Birmingham. And I was literally moving 45 minutes outside of Baltimore. And I think I applied to 32 or 36 different jobs up here. And York College was the only one that called me back. I think that a lot of them saw the JD on my resume and assumed that I was unaffordable or that I was just biding my time until I passed the bar. Even though my cover letters all indicated that I was interested in a non-legal role, a lot of them will assume that they can't afford you or that you won't be there for very long. York College, actually, when they called me, they were like, "Are you aware this is a part-time job? This is not a legal job. Like, you know that, right?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm specifically looking for a non-legal role. I want to get back into continuing to work with students," and off we went. So sometimes you have to kind of get to that right intersection with that potential employer, but being able to clearly articulate in your cover letters, highlighting skills on your resume that don't necessarily point to practicing law full out. So like in those first roles, you want to try to be bigger than your role, right? So if there are community service opportunities that line up with the values of the company, if you can highlight skills that are good for that position, but don't necessarily fit within your scope of work day to day, that will signal to them that you really are sincerely trying to jump into that role and give it your full attention and commitment.
I think that's great. Did anybody else have this obstacle or experience this?
This is also where I'll do another plug for networking and not just relying on, because I hate to say this, but just, I would say for any job search that just applying online to be no more than 50% of your effort. I mean, even less, but you've just heard Dustin, and Dustin, I'm going to put you on the spot here. But if you emailed Dustin and said, hey, Dustin, I heard you on the Belonging Project. I actually am really interested on the tech innovation side. If you either had 5 minutes to talk on the phone, or if you could just let me know if you know of any opportunities, Dustin probably does. Sorry, Dustin. But he may ping his friend and say, hey, I met this great person. She's going to apply for this job. And that's what I mean, because those are the people who can walk around that. Hey, so-and-so is going to apply for this. She actually went to law school. She doesn't want to be a lawyer anymore, but definitely look out for her resume. So I just can't stress enough, because you can get other people to do that work for you. And even if you do apply to 50 jobs, but for 3 jobs, you were able to get a recommendation, and to have someone do that is so incredibly powerful. And the other kind of personal coach, life coach motivation thing I'll add is, yes, you need to be aware of what's going on in the world and going on in the industry, but you need to know that you're in control of what you do for yourself. And I do think we have a tendency to bring that sort of energy to the search, like, oh, they're probably not going to hire me because I'm a JD. Literally, that can transition into the way you write your cover letter, where if you're like, yeah, but I don't know practice, and here's why you should hire me, that will really change the way you communicate in your job search.
Yeah, I think what everybody's really alluding to here is, it is a question people are going to have. It's, especially the further from the legal field, the position you're looking at is going to be. So own that. It's a question. Get ahead of it. It should be in your cover letter. If you get an interview, you should be the one bringing it up. If it's not the first question out of their list, you should be able to articulate what it is that you're interested in, but know that it's going to be in the back of their minds, and get ahead of it. And I do think the good thing about this one is the further out you get from law school as time goes by, it becomes less and less of a question. But if you're in school right now, or you've graduated recently, the fact of the matter is it's something that you are going to need to address, so just get ahead of it. And I think that it's not that hard to convincingly articulate what it is that you're interested in outside of the law, but just know that you need to be the one to do it.
Practice the answer out loud. No joke. You should have it down, 2 to 5 sentences. You're in, you're out. And if they want you to elaborate on it, you can.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, to get ahead of it and already have something prepared and know that you're going to have to speak to that. Here's a question too, and I just want anybody who is interested in answering to go ahead and answer the question. Kind of along those same lines, when someone assumes that you do practice law and you have to actually describe to them what you do and that you don't practice law, how do you answer that? So, I mean, I know I encounter that question a lot, maybe more so when I was straight out of law school, especially from like family members and friends, like, hey, what kind of law do you practice? And then, the spiel of what I actually do and why I don't practice. How do you guys address that?
So I will say that I encounter this on a fairly regular basis, like, oh, family member that you haven't seen in forever, or parents of a friend that you went to elementary school with whose son went to law school. Oh, you went to law school too. What kind of law do you practice? My answer oftentimes, and I'll say this, is that my practice is the business and operations of law. There are all kinds, again, ABA ethics type of stuff about what qualifies as practice and what doesn't. But if we're using a loose sense of the phrase, we're all practicing something. It just may not be going into a courtroom or drafting a contract. So there is still if you're still connected, if you're still in the legal industry in some fashion. Back when I started as a technologist, my practice was all about breaking the law down into code, kind of, and thinking through those terminologies. there's a way of I do want to use the word deflecting, reframing the question to make it about what it is that you actually do on a daily basis. Because people assume, oh, you went to law school, so you go to court or you draft contracts. But no, there are 5,000 other things that you can do. So it's just a matter of capturing it and reframing it.
No, I think that's great. Does anybody else have any encounters with this, or have you ever had to answer this question?
I get it frequently. It really doesn't faze me because I really like what I do. And I think there's two things in there. If for some reason you have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder because you're not practicing, that question may just be like a dagger to you, which is going to affect how you respond. For me, I really enjoy what I do. I was like, oh, I left practice about 5 years ago. I'm actually director of diversity and inclusion at a large law firm. It's just like not, and if they have more questions, great. But it kind of depends on where you are personally, I think.
I think that's a great point, Alexis. I do, because I know for me personally, it changed the longer I was out of law school. I think when I was right out of law school, it was a dagger. So, I think I was a little bit more defensive when I was answering that question. But I do think with time, and when you do find what it is that you love doing and you love what you do, I think that question does get a lot easier to answer.
Students ask me more than anyone else why I'm not practicing law, because they know higher ed is a choice versus big law or consulting jobs, or they know that there are choices. And, my answer to them is, when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I want to think about is, do I get to see you, or do I get to log some billable hours? And, I was like, I choose you all. I was like, why else would I drive 75 minutes each way? Like, I don't do that because I enjoy being underpaid. I was like, I get a sense of fulfillment, and I get to share the skills that I built in law school, the skills that I honed. I'm sharing them with you. I get to pour into you every day. That's why I don't practice law, because instead of pouring into clients, I'm pouring into you. And I think that's a better investment of my time right now.
I mean, yeah, and align.
Great answer.
Okay, so it looks like we have maybe about eight minutes left here. So if anybody else has questions that they want to drop into the Q&A, we'll definitely pay attention to that and pose any questions you have to the panelists. In the meantime, I would like to ask you all, what advice would you give someone who is considering an alternative career path, whether that's right out of law school or somebody who is wanting to transition over? What advice would you give them?
I talk a lot. I was going to let someone start.
I would say be open-minded. And well, I mean, that's, kind of who's not going to advise that. But being open-minded and thinking about a thing that really opened my mind in all of this was focusing on, and that I'm representing one perspective here, but focusing on the business facet of your profession. That's a thing that I had not contemplated going into law school in any way, shape, or form. But whether you're starting up your own shop, whether you're going into big law, whether you're going, maybe not so much into the government, but all of those facets have business components to them. And they're different things that people aren't lawyers in a vacuum, I guess is a way that I would put it, or the majority of lawyers are not lawyers in a vacuum. And so acknowledging that and thinking about the world that's around that and everything that goes into the profession is a good way to start thinking about those other things that might appeal to you and might, really leverage your skill set.
Thanks, Dustin. Alexis, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So a lot of this is about patience, getting experience, realizing that you're just going to path. and to see what happens. I really think a lot of the time we're looking for rules, we're looking for permission. There's somebody probably who's listening who's like, but I really want to do X. Can one of them tell me it's okay? Yes, it's okay. The only question is how much work are you going to have to put into that? But I think in a lot of times we're really focused on the destination. You're dying to know, like, well, what's it going to be? Am I going to enjoy it? And that's just going to take time. But if you in the short term can focus on what's the next step. Okay, that one job posting I saw yesterday sounds interesting. And really break it down to the steps. Trust that your path is going to unfold as it should. But I can't stress enough to find something in it, if you can, that lights you up, because that is what makes you a good interview. That is what makes you, when you're working late, you kind of don't mind because you're in this nerdy part of legal tech that didn't even know existed. And if you can find that, you will be wildly successful. And I'll also plug a project I've been working on recently for my firm called The Path and the Practice. It's a podcast where I talk to individual attorneys at my firm and we walk through their path. And so for someone who's maybe debating between legal or not, to hear a number of attorneys just say, didn't know I wanted to be a lawyer, 10 years later I ended up here, I highly recommend checking that out. But ultimately just trust in yourself and put one step in front of the other.
No, I think that's great, Alexis.
I think that a lot of us have mentors who are of generations where it was much more common to get one job and you can sit in there, you can get your gold watch after 30 years and you can retire and be comfortable. That work situation doesn't exist anymore, especially for old millennials, newer millennials, these Gen Zs. That is just not the career trajectory a lot of us either want or can have. And so I think that the realization that we have to be flexible and nimble and adaptive is hard sometimes to jive with, well, I have to commit to practicing law for my whole career, or I have to commit to not practicing law. I can't ever go back. And that's just not true. Different state bars will happily take your money for you to take the bar somewhere else later in life. Like, they'll be there. And these non-legal roles will also be there. So if you want the stability, if you have a legal job in your pocket, you can take it and pay bills for the first 5 years to get your student loans paid off, you can go ahead and take that legal job. Non-legal roles will still exist, and the skills you build in those first 5 years will only be of more value to you down the road. But if you want to explore and do the Peace Corps for 2 years and then come back and do a legal job after that, you can, the bar will be there. I promise. The bar will be there. It is okay to be adaptive, knowing that the job is going to also ask you to be adaptive. You will grow and change in a role you hate and in a role you love. So you might as well exercise some control over when and how that adaptation happens. Don't be afraid, because it's hectic to write a cover letter and it's hectic to wait to hear back. So you might as well exercise some control over that and know, like, it's okay. It is absolutely okay. I wish that I could go back in time and tell myself this. And as a 3L, you are not going to have, more than likely, a job where you get your watch after 30 years. Like, you're going to have 5 different, I don't know where he is on y'all's screen. He's down there for me. You're going to have 5 different titles in a role. You're going to have a chance to practice for several years and then do something non-legal. Like, these opportunities will come, I promise, but it's okay. It's okay to acknowledge that you're going to be adaptive and to operate accordingly.
I wish you were there when I was a 3L to tell me that.
Well, I was, and I didn't do a good job, Whitney. I'm sorry.
Courtney?
Yeah, I think all too often law school in the legal industry maybe gives the feeling that, the goal coming out of law school is to get a job with a big firm, make a ton of money, stay there. And the fact of the matter is, not everyone's going to end up on that path, even if that's what they want. But there's lots of people that don't even want to go that route. And, it's not a winning and losing scenario. It's about figuring out what you want to do, what works for you. Going back to what Dustin said about business of law, all of the focus there is, growing and exciting. Like, a lot of the exciting stuff that's happening in the legal industry isn't necessarily tied to the traditional practice. And I think one of the things to be considering is what is going to keep you excited long term, right? What do you want to be doing in 10 years? And maybe there's aspects of traditional legal roles that, you know, are great for a bit, or, you know, test it out, pay down some muscle loans, but like, is that going to be what excites you for your whole career? Which is probably not going to be in the same position you start in. So,
the buzz phrase that came to mind, just to wrap the one last thing, is be entrepreneurial on your own behalf. I think everyone on this call has done that in trying to figure out what it is that they want, and taking that approach to your own career development is going to serve you well.
Absolutely. I think one thing I wanted to kind of add here too is, you know, I think in trying to figure out what it is that you want to do, if it is a non-traditional legal role, I think something that was helpful, at least for myself, was kind of digging down and thinking of things that I feel, one, that I'm good at, and two, that I enjoy doing, even if it's not tied necessarily to a job function that you've ever had. Maybe it's an extracurricular, maybe it's, you know, I think of myself back when I was in high school even, and I loved organizing. I loved, whether it was, you know, for cheerleading, organizing formations and dances, or whether it was organizing something for clubs that I was a part of. I recognized that I love organizing. And so, you know, project management, there's so much organizing, and that's what I do all day, you know, whether it's organizing people, whether it's organizing information. So I think in trying to figure out, you know, hey, I do maybe want to do a non-traditional type of legal role, but what is it that I could do? I think that's an avenue too to kind of explore, in addition to, you know, things that you actually learned at law school that piqued your interest. Just think about things that you as a person like to do, and that you're good at. I think that might be helpful. So, so with that, I think we are at time, and we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I do want to give everyone on the panel a moment, if they would like, to, you know, whether if you want to provide your email address, or just if you want to have people get in contact with you, is there ways that they're able to do that if they did kind of want to follow up and have some additional questions for you?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can just search Phillips Thomas Hornbuckle. I'm also on Twitter at Phithom256, Phithom 256, for people who hate emails and think they can do everything they need in a Twitter character limit. So I would say those are the two fastest ways to catch me, and I'm happy to talk with anyone who has higher ed, student affairs questions.
Yeah, I'm also on LinkedIn. It's one of my favorite places, so I post content pretty frequently. You can find me on Foley's website, but I'll tell you LinkedIn is a lot faster, because when you enter my work email box, you're not necessarily getting top priority. So message me over LinkedIn.
I would say 100% the same. LinkedIn, just for the sake of my work email inbox. Dustin F. Robinson, F as in Foxtrot. Happy to talk technology, client relationship management, business development, any of that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. And same, and I'm on LinkedIn too, so give me a message.
Sounds great. Well, thank you all for joining, and we will wrap up for today's webinar. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.